Hi, everyone. It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. And tonight's guest is a therapist named Victoria DuBarry from Inbalance Psychotherapy. And she knows a lot about love and relationships and sees different aged clients. But before I continue talking for her, Victoria, why don't you just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and then what makes you so good at your job?
Of course. So thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria. I am a mental health therapist and a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. I've been in the field for around almost 10 years now, but I actually became licensed almost 6 years ago. So, in those last 10 years, I've been doing in-home therapy, seeing people that way. I've worked in many different substance abuse clinics and centers. And the last few years, I've been working in private practice, and I have my own practice now. And I see fifth graders and up. I am virtual. And I see clients in different states like New Jersey, Florida, South Carolina, and Vermont. So I see fifth graders and up, so around 10 or 11, teens and adults as well. And it ranges from, people struggling with anxiety, OCD, ADHD, substance use, relationship issues. So, dating, going through a divorce or a really tough breakup. And in a few months, I'll be also seeing couples. So that's kind of a little bit about what I've been doing. Your other question, which I love, what makes me good at my job? I love this question. So how I like to answer is what makes me good at my job is a few things. The first one, having empathy. And I love to see my clients succeed. I really find joy in that. And the second thing is I bring my personality to a session. I'm not just that therapist robot that's just going to sit there and oh, how are you feeling? Tell me about that. Yes, of course I want to know that, but I'm a human too. And I think that's why my clients and I have such great connections, because I laugh with them. I really value what they say to me, and I love feedback, and I celebrate wins with them. And we just have such a great connection, and it just feels really natural. And I think that's what makes my job so enjoyable and what makes me good at it.
I just thought of something as you were talking, how important it is for people to establish a rapport and to establish trust. And that you are talking to an audience of people who generally are dealing with very high conflict relationships, whether they're going through divorce or separations or custody battles, and especially after it's done and they're in the aftermath of still trying to parent with a really difficult person. So often trust has been betrayed in these situations. So how does somebody in a situation like that establish a rapport with someone like you? Because like what you said, it's not like someone can just come in and you say, "Oh, tell me your problems." Like, why would I want to talk to anybody? How do you go about doing that?
Right. So what I always tell potential new clients is give it a few sessions. We don't have to get into anything too deep. We can just feel it out, feel me out. Every therapist is so different in how they approach therapy, their personality. So you have to find someone that you click with, and that might take a few tries with the therapist. That may take a few sessions. But I let the client know, I will follow them. I will, if they don't want to talk and if they're not too heavy, if they just want to feel me out, of course, that's fine. I mean, it's so important to trust your therapist and have that connection. I mean, this is someone that you're opening up to after, like you said, going through something that's so raw and vulnerable. The connection has to be there, and that takes time. That takes time for sure. And I always say to my new clients, after 3 or 4 sessions, I check back in with them. I'm like, hey, what's working? What's not working? How do you feel about therapy? Because the connection has to be there to move forward.
Yeah. And also I was thinking about how you said you see 5th grade and up. So those are very different from adult
Yes.
clients. I'm now thinking about the children of the people that we work with and getting them to open up, because often one of their parents is saying, you don't need a therapist. Therapy is bad. you're being, your other parent thinks something's wrong with you, and that's why you're being forced to go. But a lot of these kids really need therapy to get through the situation. I mean, kids in divorce already have enough to deal with, but especially something like this.
Oh yeah. And for that age group, my goal is to just be that person where they trust and they can talk about anything with. And I let them know, like, this conversation stays between us unless, of course, there's something that I feel like mom and dad have to know, like if you're in danger. But I let them know off the bat, like, this is your time. I'm someone that you can come to with anything. And that in itself is so comforting to them. A client I saw a few weeks ago, she's in 5th grade. She says to me, this stays between us, right? Not mom and dad. I'm like, yes, as long as you're safe. Yes. And just like seeing that look on her face of, okay, like this is my time. This is my 45 minutes, my hour is huge.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So I know we were thinking about a topic for today, and we were talking about how people in situations like our clients, they're always thinking, how did this happen to me?
Yes.
And there's a lot of shame associated with being involved in these terrible relationships in the first place, especially because many of the people that we know are very, very successful in other areas of life. So it's even more shameful to think, how did I end up with this partner who really took advantage? And that's an understatement. So, so I want to get into trauma a little bit, since that's something you specialize in. And I know that one of the topics we talked about is how your trauma will follow you. Can you go a little bit into what you mean when you said that before?
Yeah, of course. So I want to start by saying that trauma to me, I'll use a very short kind of definition, is anything that is stressful, happens very quickly, is frightening, it's very distressing, and does not give our brain any time to kind of process what is happening to us. So trauma can be many different things to many people. So trauma comes in two responses. It affects people emotionally, and it affects people physically. So that's kind of what I mean when I say your trauma will follow you, especially emotionally. So if you go through something that's traumatic, let's say you witnessed your parents growing up fight every single day and argue, and they're screaming in your house, it's just chaotic. That childhood trauma will follow you until when you're an adult and you're in relationships and you're kind of learning, wait a second, what do I want in a relationship? Why aren't my relationships maybe working? Because all you saw maybe as a child are your caretakers, really maybe giving out the healthiest example of what love or what a relationship is. So again, when I say your trauma follows you, it's maybe, things in your past, things that you've been through, and that affecting you in the present day.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible, since that we carry that with us, how do you get better?
Oh,
Big question, right?
a big question. Yeah, I'm so many parts to it. So,
Yeah.
Step one, find a therapist that you trust and see what comes up. Because again, it emotionally and physically, someone could have such different responses to trauma. So emotionally, it could look like insomnia, nightmares, maybe using drugs and alcohol to cope, right? Then, emotionally too, this could look like having trouble communicating how you feel, self-sabotage, not letting people in, having trust issues. So I think just acknowledging those things and working with a professional, a therapist that you trust and you can talk about those things with, I mean, that's huge right there. We can't work on something unless we acknowledge it. And I think so that would be step one, right? Is also acknowledging what you've been through and maybe how it's affected you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking too, I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she's a recovery therapist, and she said that one of the things that she sees a lot involves dopamine, the pleasure hormone. And with addictions, and not just the ones that we think of most of the time, but with all kinds of addictions, it's like a search for dopamine. It's almost like I need the pleasure hormone, and to not pay attention to whatever I'm dealing with now. How does that, do you see a connection between that and trauma?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. Trauma and addiction go hand in hand, for sure. Addiction, and regardless if it's substance use or gambling or whatever it may be, um, yes, it's genetic, but it also can be caused by trauma. It's a way to cope. It might not be the healthiest way, but it's still a way to cope with what we've been through. It's a way to numb a feeling, or get rid of, in our brain, get rid of something that we've been through that we don't want to think about or deal with at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's I imagine tricky, because you said part of your background is in addiction.
Yes. Yeah. And working in addiction clinics for years and just seeing the trauma and the mental health, and then on top of substances, everything really is connected in some way. It really is, a way to cope with trauma. So you're using substances to cope with what you've been through because you don't want to deal with it, because it's painful and it's scary and it's hard. And then with that comes, maybe a depression or anxiety. So everything is connected in some way, and that's the tough part about it.
Yeah. Now, what you said too about an example of, let's say someone grew up in a home where there's lots of
Mhm,
fighting. We know that
mhm,
people often stay in toxic relationships when they have children, because they think that it's better
mhm.
to have an intact family. And what they don't realize is they are normalizing that kind of behavior for
Yeah.
children. So when
Mhm.
somebody comes out of an environment like that and becomes an adult, what what hope do they have for finding healthy love and relationships? How do you define love and relationships?
Such a good question. So, two parts to that. I think the first part would be for the person who may have experienced or saw not great things growing up from their caretakers. What they may notice as they get older and they're in their relationships, they're going to notice that maybe relationships continue not to work out for the same reason. They're going to see patterns, hopefully. Hopefully they see patterns. If not, again, therapy is a great place to find those patterns. And that's where, we usually get into, I say to my clients, like you just asked me, like, what is love? What is relationships? And that's actually a small question, but actually a really, really big, hefty question to people. For me, when I think of love and relationships, I think of, yes, it's empathy and respect and being able to be who you are, and just a feeling of comfort. But at the same time, relationships is also an acknowledgement of, okay, um, how can maybe I be a better person, or how can we be better people together? Like how can we grow together? Do we bring out the best in each other? Do we want to? How can we help each other grow? So I think love can be so many things, right? Like love is an emotion, yes, and some people would say it's a way of acting, but a relationship is basically a commitment to how involved you're going to be in someone's life. So a relationship combined with love, that could be a pretty great thing depending on your view and what you've been through.
Yeah. So when, I feel like pop culture and social media has a lot of poor examples of
Yeah.
relationships, and
Mhm,
people watch movies and see shows and
mhm,
think that this is how it's supposed to be. It's perfection, or
mhm,
really toxic behavior that's couched in something that looks like being pursued or
mhm.
desire and romance.
Yeah.
How can people I don't know, at what age should people start learning about what healthy relationship is before they really get pummeled with this stuff?
Ooh, so when different parts of it. So when do we usually start learning about relationships slash when should we? So we start learning about relationships when we're babies. Like this, like a few months old. We even as small children, like so they're so curious and they're listening to their caretakers and they're watching how they interact and they're seeing, again, even as a baby and a newborn, like, how are my parents reacting? They're listening, they're looking, they're observing, they're like sponges. So right then and there is when we really do start learning about relationships and attachment. But when do we finally maybe take a step back and examine our own relationships? Usually happens from what I see in adulthood, when relationship patterns come to the surface, or a bad breakup happens, or I have clients say to me, Victoria, I feel like I'm dating the same person over and over again. It's just
Mhm.
not working out. I'm like, oh, okay, we need a session here about childhood. I need to know what went on, and how you view love, and how you view emotions and relationships.
Yeah. And that also reminds me, I went to this movie screening at this place called, well, it was sponsored by this company called Sanctuary for Families that does a lot of help for domestic violence survivors in New York City. And the movie was directed by someone who had been a client there, but it was about four different women. And it wasn't about their experiences so much as domestic violence survivors, but who they are as people. And one woman was talking about how when she grew up, she said she had a very happy childhood, and her parents had an intact marriage, and they never fought. And so she said the one time she remembers that they had a fight, they went outside, had a conversation, and came back. So you would think that someone like her would be in like a perfect relationship because of, this wonderful model. But she said that what
Yeah.
she actually didn't learn were conflict resolution skills, because
Yes.
her parents didn't fight in front of her. In her head, she thought that a healthy relationship meant that you got along all the time. And in order to get along all the time, one person
Mhm.
has to be really agreeable, right? Because
Yep.
then there's no conflict, there's no struggle. So what do you think about something like that when we think, well, if I'm showing my kids a healthy relationship, then how am I doing them a disservice? Like, how can I win?
Yes. So I remind my clients and our parents, a healthy relationship is also going to be, you know, what does it look like when you're angry at each
Mhm.
other? How do you what do arguments look like? What about disagreements? I'm totally okay with people, parents and spouses having disagreements. I mean, it's going to happen. A relationship is never going to be, you know, this sunshine and roses and be 50-50. It's just not realistic, and that's totally okay and normal. But, and I hear that all the time too, like, well, my parents never fought. I'm like, well, that might be more concerning, because we want to show, our children and kids, like, it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to even argue. But how do you do that? Are you listening to each other? Are you letting each other talk? Um, what hopefully you're not calling each other names. Or the biggest thing too is, how do you apologize to each other? Can you
Yeah.
go back and be like, hey, I'm sorry, this is how I felt. I should have done better. I can't do better. Having your child see that, that is huge. That's some of the questions I do ask, my clients in when we have a session on family history. I'm like, how did you know that your parents were in love or angry? How did they apologize to each other? Again, what did anger look like? And those are hard questions for a lot of adult children to answer.
Yeah, and what you just said about apologizing, I just was doing a summit on safe parenting, and we were talking
Mhm.
about the importance of modeling healthy relationship behavior for your children,
Mhm.
and also how when you apologize to your kids or in front of your kids, they learn that they too can
Mhm.
apologize and they can
Yes.
take accountability for something. And it's not like this horrible thing to say, I'm sorry. So it makes
Yeah.
them healthier people and healthier relationship partners also, in the future.
Yeah, as adults, we have the power to model to children how to behave, how to act, how to apologize, how to love, how to show affection. I mean, we have so much more power than we even realize. And kids are sponges. Babies are sponges, right? They're looking, they're observing. Um, so it's important to show those raw moments. So anger is okay, frustration is okay. It's arguments are okay, disagreements. It's how we speak to one another, and then what we do moving forward is the important piece of it.
Yeah, I remember, so, Chris and I are a couple in real life, and we've been together for a little less than 9 years. But one thing that really struck me when we were early in the relationship was we were arguing about something, and he
Mhm.
said, "Hold on a second, I want to get a pad." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "I want to write down the points that you're making because I don't want to
Mhm.
interrupt you, but I want to make sure that I have the chance to address them afterward." And it blew my mind. And just the
Mhm.
fact that he did that calmed me down because I felt
Yeah.
like I was being heard and listened
Yes.
to, and it was very calm. And
Yes.
later when I said, "That was amazing that you did that, like, no one ever did that for me." And he said, "Oh, that's something we learned in business." I was like, "But that's so applicable to
Yeah.
relationships."
Oh my gosh, feeling heard is the best feeling. It feels so good to know that someone is taking the time, they want to hear you, they're trying to hear, they're trying to understand you. As humans, we love that. We love to feel heard and understood, and if not, um, so many emotions can pop up when we don't
Right.
feel heard and understood.
Yeah. Heard, understood, and
Oh, yes, the recipe for such a great feeling and for such a great relationship.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so now let's switch gears and start getting into stress and anxiety. This is the opposite of
Yes.
that. So we often talk about stress and anxiety, and it's like everybody has anxiety these days.
Mhm,
A lot of our clients take anxiety medication,
mhm,
and they're also
mhm.
really worried about that. But what is the difference between stress and anxiety?
So stress is going to come and go, right? Stress is a very natural response to situations and it's temporary. So whether it's maybe you have a test coming up or a deadline at work, you're feeling some sort of way about it, but you know it's going to pass. You know
Mhm.
that it's just temporary. It's going to go away after. Anxiety, on the other hand, is usually pretty persistent, and it's going to affect daily life. So it's going to get in the way of maybe you socializing, you doing work, if you're at school. It might even get in the way of relationships. Anxiety is going to be pretty present. um, Similar physical feelings, right? Like stress, maybe you are nauseous or you're sweating. So physically, they can be very similar. But the biggest takeaway would be anxiety is very persistent and will get in the way of daily things, but stress is very temporary.
Do you notice more anxiety since COVID? Everybody keeps talking about how COVID really affected the world, and
Mhm.
it seems like many people have social anxiety because they were so isolated and they just feel like it's harder to interact.
Yes, definitely a lot more anxiety, a lot more social anxiety. I think it's a mixture of, I mean, it is a traumatic event. The pandemic really, we had to adapt pretty quickly to being home, working from home. A lot of people were entering new relationships, just FaceTiming someone maybe that they met online, right? So things had to change so quick. And then life changed again, right? Then we were allowed to do things. So everything had to change so quick that our brain was like, whoa. And the
Mm.
social completely skyrocketed. I think too, a lot of people took the time during the pandemic to start therapy and get to know themselves a little bit more. And I don't think a lot of people realize that they had anxiety. It was there the whole time, even when they were children, but they did not realize it until they had a second to be like, okay, like let me take some time for me and see what's going on.
That's really interesting. So in a way, it was a blessing because people had nothing else to do for a while and they could really focus on what's wrong with me. Let me start taking care of it.
For some people, yeah, they were like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. Like, what is this feeling? And I'm like, that's gonna be anxiety. And they're like, oh my God, like I've had this stomach ache, since I was young. I'm like, you've always had anxiety then? And they're like, wow, it's very interesting.
Yeah. So what are some coping skills? Like what can people do? Does it have to be, do they have to take medication?
No, definitely not. With medication, I call it like kind of a vitamin for your brain. And not everyone needs to be on medication. I believe in medication. I think it is so beyond helpful. I've seen it do wonderful things. So it's really up to the person. But I will give you some like 3 or 4 of my favorite coping skills, if you don't mind, that anyone can do for any age. So my first one is a grounding technique, super easy to do. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. So again, it's a grounding exercise. So this is good for, again, any age. So I tell my clients, okay, if you're feeling a little anxious, if you feel a panic attack coming on, try and pause. And you're going to name 5 things you see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you could smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So the point of this is to kind of slow your brain down, slow the anxiety down, have you pause and focus on other things around you that when you're anxious, you probably wouldn't. So it kind of grounds you and brings you back. The second one is, I mean, kind of a coping skill, kind of not, but I tell everyone, if you can acknowledge you're an anxious person, know what your anxiety is to you, because it's going to be very beneficial for you. What makes you anxious? What are your triggers? Anxiety affects everyone so differently. So find out how it affects you mentally, how it affects you physically, what your triggers are, and that will give you a base on not just what coping skills to use, but kind of how to handle life a little bit easier and better. So that's another one that's kind of a coping skill. Another one of my favorite coping skills, I call it a brain dump. This works anytime, but I really suggest it for people who have nighttime anxiety. So before they go to bed, their mind is racing. Do a good brain dump. So get a piece of paper and just write whatever comes to your mind. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be full sentences. Just go for it. Just write things down and then keep it to the next day. A lot of times the next day people go back to their list, their brain dump, and they're like, this is actually just all anxious thoughts. I really don't have to do anything with this list. Or some people are like, oh, okay, so I got my thoughts down. They're not going anywhere. So let me try and organize it. So we can go either way.
I love that one in particular resonates with me because I've journaled since I was 12 years old. And often in the middle of the night when I can't sleep, especially as all these years of court and like catastrophizing, I feel like it's almost like emotional nausea that I need to like throw up on paper and get it out of my head. And once I get it out of my head, I feel better because it's not like swirling around.
Yep, that mental clutter is on paper. It's a great way to untangle your mind and try and shut it down, calm it down, and be like, okay, let me save this for another time. Maybe not right before bed when I'm trying to fall asleep. And 2, having so many things in our brain is so overwhelming, but knowing it's on paper and it's not going anywhere, we're not going to forget it, is really comforting, more than we realize.
Yeah.
And I will say, one more too, more so with panic attacks. For anyone who struggles with panic attacks, I feel you. They're so not fun. My 2 go-to things: keep something sour with you. So whether it's like a lemon or sour candy, and if you can have like a Stanley cup or something, hydro flask, whatever it is that keeps ice and water very, very cold for a long time. Amazing. If you feel a panic attack coming on, hold an ice cube, drink some very cold water, focus on that sensation. And same thing with sour candy or lemon. We want to kind of shock our senses and focus on whatever that feeling, or that texture, whatever that may be, to kind of ground ourselves. So it's similar to the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique, but it's going to shock us a little bit more, especially when we're in that panic state. We're going to need that.
That's so interesting that you said that, because I have a friend of mine and I had breakfast a couple of weeks ago, and she said, do you know the thing about the sour lemon candy? And she said, you should make sure that you recommend that to people, especially as they're dealing with a court situation or they're really, really panicky. And it's perfect. So
Yes.
It's almost like your brain can't focus on that horrible, strong taste and the stuff you're worried about.
Yep. It brings you back.
All right,
grounds
great.
you.
So those of you going to court, put a sour candy in your pocket.
Yes. Sour Patch Kids. Noted.
Yeah. Oh, those are great. And those are so simple. And it's important, I think, to know that there are the things that we can control, like all the chaos around us and the stress, that this is something that we can do to just calm ourselves down for a few minutes to get through a difficult period. So
Absolutely.
thank you. That's
Yeah.
really helpful. Okay, another one that we had talked about was these triggers. And my friend that I stayed with over the weekend said that he doesn't like to use the word trigger. He uses the word activate. But
I like that. I
yeah,
like that. I would agree. Yeah.
yeah. So he said, so you about some of the warning signs that that we are like getting activated or defensive or triggered. Like, how do we know when it's coming on? I imagine it's not the same as a panic attack.
No, so, it's gonna look different for everyone. So in terms of maybe getting defensive, I believe you just mentioned that. So if we're being if we feel a trigger coming on, which to me, a trigger, definitely overused word, but I like to define it as, emotions, people, places, or things. So it could, again, gonna look different for everyone. But in terms of being defensive, um, if you're triggered, you're going to most likely shut down. Maybe you might give the silent treatment. Maybe you are just going to completely stop listening to that person or anything in general. Um, Maybe you're going into blame mode, right? Like you're blaming the other person for something they did a while back. Maybe you're being critical. There could be so many things that pops up for someone who is triggered and becomes defensive.
That's interesting because I, I met a woman recently and we got together last night, and she was saying that when she first met me and I said what I did for my job, that she felt triggered. She said, I felt like, oh no, this woman, like high conflict divorce, I went through something like this. I don't think I want to talk to her. And then she recognized that, and we haven't gotten into it too much, but we talked about approaching something with curiosity. So
Yes.
because she knows what she's doing, she was like, okay, let me try to stay curious and move through this. And then then she realized, like, I'm going to keep listening. And now it's like, oh, actually, this is pretty interesting. And then we became friends. I felt so bad that my career triggered her, but she said it was really interesting how she recognized just that word was like, oh no, I've been through this. I talk about her to go there again.
Yeah, I mean, I give her credit for realizing that and acknowledging it. I think that in itself is so amazing that she was just aware of that. And again, out of your control, right? Like when someone becomes triggered, it could be for so many reasons, especially if they're feeling attacked, if they're feeling guilty, if they're feeling ashamed, like, or if they went through something, right? That was the traumatic event that could trigger some sort of action or emotion in them that could come to the surface.
I do a lot of posts on social media, and often say, ooh, this post is so familiar. It's so familiar.
Yes.
And I remember this really well.
Yeah, it's gonna, like,
But
like you said, activate something
validates them.
in us. Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
Yep. Okay. And now there's something that you had mentioned that I'd never heard of before.
Mhm.
Iceberg. What is the iceberg?
Yeah, so the anger iceberg, I use this again for any age group. It is amazing. So, when you think of an iceberg, you think of a giant piece of ice. Half of it is outside of the water, the other half is under the water. So, when you think of anger, anger would be the outside, the top of the tip of the iceberg. Anger is an emotion that is usually very easy to feel, very easy to see. It's something that we as humans can usually easily identify. But the thing is, there's so much more to anger. Anger is actually hiding a bunch of other emotions. So, kind of like an iceberg. You see the outside of the iceberg above the water, aka the anger. Underneath the iceberg, there's still more ice there. Maybe we're just not seeing it. So, anger iceberg. You see the anger, but what's really going underneath of it. Um, if you need to envision it, if you Google anger iceberg, there's so many different types of wonderful images that I use with my clients. They're also great that I like to use in sessions. So again, anger is something that we can easily identify, but there's so many more emotions underneath the surface. So what I usually get is, Victoria, I don't understand. I'm obviously angry, but like, I'm also kind of embarrassed and I'm crying. I don't know what's going on.
Mm,
I'm like, okay, so anger iceberg, let's go over it. So, anger, yes, you're feeling angry, but it sounds like you're also maybe feeling embarrassed or wronged or disrespected, anxious. There's so many other emotions underneath anger. So, it's really important that we can identify those emotions. That way, we can learn to take a pause and then tell the other person what we're actually feeling. It's a great way to get more in tune with how we feel on a deeper level.
yeah, and it's interesting because it feels like having the vocabulary
Yes.
to say what something is so reassuring.
Mhm.
Like, "Oh, that's" like, often Chris has a slide that we use that's like a little light bulb, and we talk about the light bulb moment, like, "I figured out that this is what it is, there's a name for it, and I'm not the
Mhm.
only one who's experiencing it." And it's just like, now
Yeah,
I can
it's
talk
just
about it.
comforting,
Yeah.
right? Because we know those basic emotions, happy, sad, angry, but we gotta know the deeper stuff. Because the deeper stuff, that's gonna tell us a lot. That's gonna make life a lot easier just in terms of how to talk to people, how to talk to ourselves, how to better understand ourselves. So again, the anger iceberg is so great to just having clients say to me, I'm so angry. I'm like, okay, just take a look at this iceberg. Because there's like probably 50 emotions, maybe even more, um, underneath this iceberg that, again, if you Google anger iceberg, you'll see. And a lot of times clients are like, oh my gosh, I identify with all these things. I had no idea that my anger was masking that. That is so freeing for
Mm.
so many people.
Yeah, and again, I'm thinking about kids, like, because you see 5th grade and
Hmm.
up with adolescents,
Hmm.
being able to identify their feelings instead
Hmm.
of just, this murky, like, resentment.
Oh yeah, I use it with, again, any age. The anger iceberg works. If you're feeling angry in some way and it's like maybe icky or confusing, it's a great tool to use for any age group.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I'd never heard of that until I talked to you. Okay, and now because we talked about how, why did this happen to me,
Mhm,
and people repeating the cycle,
mhm,
especially with toxic relationships, is so common in our community, which is
mhm.
so sad too, because often they'll get out of one relationship and be like, "Ah, I met a new person," and then some time passes, like, it's the same one. Again,
Yes.
what are some of the red flags with dating?
Ooh, so I have a lot. So I'll
Good.
quickly go over them for you. So the first one is going to be love bombing. And this is actually can be very hard to spot. So this is gonna look like constant gifts or them saying, oh no, like don't hang out with your friends. I really need to see you again. Hang out with me. A lot of I love yous very quickly, like wanting to spend again a lot of time with them. It's a rush of love and things in a very quick matter of time. So that's the first one to watch out for. Another one is they don't respect your boundaries, and not just like sexual boundaries, but your time, your space, um, your friendships, and just there's just maybe a lack of respect there. So that's a good one. Another one that I always hear when they say, "Oh, every single one of my exes, they're just crazy."
Oh, yeah.
I'm
That's
like,
big in our
that
community.
the big red flag.
Bitter, bitter,
Yes.
and crazy.
Yes. So it's like,
Boring.
well, yeah, to me, it's like, okay, but like, where is your part in it? Like, what about your reflection of, or there's just to me that says there's no pause. That person might not have a pause or that emotional maturity to admit whatever it may be. Um, Another big one is they're not motivated. And I'm not talking about, career wise, unless that's a value to you. But I mean, in general, let's say for you, you value someone who wants to try new things, who wants to go out and just do like new stuff. Well, they have to be motivated to do that. So is this person setting up dates? Is this person, you know, does this person seem motivating to you? Like, what do you value in a relationship? And can this person maybe have that for you? Another one,
So
I'm
so
in,
so with that one, let me so I'm
yeah,
not I'm a little uncertain about with the motivated because I immediately thought like job wise, especially with
yes,
adults. But I'm
yeah.
thinking when you started explaining it a little bit,
Mhm.
about, is that other person motivated to set up dates? I know some people get in a situation where they'll see someone and then the other person isn't making the effort to
Mm-hmm.
call them back or initiate plans. And so then they'll work harder. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So
Okay.
exactly. So effort, motivation, that's another great word. So is this person putting in effort? Are they also motivated to focus on a relationship or make it work? What effort are they putting in? And I guess that goes to like, knowing you, knowing what you value, what you want in a relationship, and seeing if this person is motivated or, has the effort that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. So I think part of that is you also knowing yourself.
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, I have to admit, I don't think I really thought about what I wanted, like seriously thought about it until I was in my 40s.
Yeah. I hear that all the time too. I think it's not something that is talked about enough, especially growing up too. I think no one's ever like, so when you get older, what do you want in a relationship? It's like we kind
Right.
of don't discuss those things until maybe
Right.
a breakup, or we go through something that forces us to pause and be like, wait a minute.
Yeah. It's more like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Where are
Yeah.
you going to school? What kind of job
Yeah.
are you doing? But
Hmm.
and to ask what someone's looking for in another person, it's really fun to think about that.
Yeah. And that's, again, another tough question for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. But this is good. This is very provocative.
Yeah. So again, all good things. And another one too that I always tell people, it's, when you're on a date, how does that person act towards other people, right? Strangers, maybe people in like the service industry. If you're at a restaurant, like how are they kind? Are they respectful? Like how does this person act in public? That's also going to be very telling of a red or a green flag.
With that, I read something recently that I thought was interesting. They said some toxic people are very ingratiating towards
Mhm.
wait staff and something like that. So they said
Mhm.
sometimes it's tricky because sometimes it'll be like
Yes.
over the top kind, and
Yep.
that can fool you. But the thing to watch for also is the amount of negative things they say about other
Mm.
people within a short period of time. And I was just like, ooh, I
Mhm.
never thought about that. So,
Mhm.
so not necessarily to act directly to somebody else, but when they talk about like my exes are crazy or it's almost like how often are they the victim or complaining about a
Mhm.
situation or work or whatever? But to pay attention to the amount of negative talk
Mhm.
versus just neutral or
Oh, yeah.
positive talk.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's so huge too. And even taking note of, when you're not with that person, how do you feel? Are you
Mm.
happy? Are you questioning things? Do you feel confused?
Oh, that's a
Really
great
taking note
one.
of how you feel.
Oh my gosh, I feel like every teenager needs to hear that.
Yes.
And
That
not
goes
just about the romantic partners, but friendships, right?
Yes, exactly. I was about to say this is good for anyone. I feel like in your life is, how do I feel? Like if you're not feeling too great after, it might be a good time to pause and see what's going on.
Yeah. I love that you said, I thought you were going to say, how do you feel when you're with this person? But you said, how do you feel when you're not with this person?
Hmm. Yeah. Yep.
When you have
Huge.
that time to reflect and pause.
Yeah. When you have that time to really just, again, reflect and pause and feel your feelings. See what comes up
Right.
for you. That's part of a healthy relationship, is to be able to, you know, when you're not with that person, be able to check in with yourself.
Right. And also to feel calm because, certain relationships, people are like, I need to find out. I'm suspicious. I wonder what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep. That
that's not healthy.
No, definitely not.
Or
And
in like wait, like a perpetual state of waiting. Like I'm waiting for them to call me. I'm wondering if they're going to do what they said they're going to do.
yeah, that's anxiety, relationship anxiety at its finest, right? That, oh my gosh, like what are they gonna do? What's their next move? Are they gonna call me? Are they gonna text me? Did I do something wrong? Are they out there doing something else? I mean, oh my gosh, like the overwhelm and the thoughts can be so consuming for people.
Yeah. Oh my God. This is so helpful, Victoria.
Good. I'm so happy. Good
Yeah.
conversation.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell people how they can find you?
Absolutely. So I am on Instagram. My Instagram is In Balance Psychotherapy. And if you Google my name, Victoria Duberry, you will see my website. And I would love to keep in touch and hear all the things.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. We covered a lot in here besides why did this happen to me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate you. All
No, my pleasure. All right. So we'll talk soon.
right.
And
Thank you.